My goal in this lesson is to help 3ds Max users transition to Houdini. As you've probably noticed, Houdini is quite different than 3ds Max. They don't look that different at first glance. They've got a 3D viewport and a bunch of buttons. You may have heard that you have to throw everything away you know about Max in order to learn Houdini. Not everything. Today we're going to focus on one very important aspect of Max and Houdini that are quite similar, and that's Max's modifier stack and Houdini's network editor. You may have heard that Houdini's network editor and nodes are like Max's modifier stack on steroids. That's kind of true. While the mod stack is only one aspect of working with objects in Max, everything in Houdini is a network. Everything is a node. And it puts a lot of power at your fingertips, but it can also be quite daunting and easy to get lost. Houdini demands a lot of attention to what you're doing and intent on what you're doing and why. Houdini requires an intimidating amount of foundational knowledge, and that's why we're here. We're going to talk about what I think is the most important aspect of the two programs that are alike. That should hopefully help you and your brain transition into Houdini and understand it better. Now let's start by comparing the interfaces. They both have a 3D viewport. 3ds Max has a Scene Explorer on the side, and if we click this tiny little triangle, we will see Houdini has something called a tree view. And this view is a little bit like our Scene Explorer over here. Let's make a box. Great. And Houdini, let's make a box. Click the button, click, drops it down. I've set Max to work in meters, even though I usually work in inches. But by default, Houdini works in meters, so I thought we should just make them exactly the same. Let's make my box 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. And in Houdini, by default, the box is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. Okay. Well, notice the difference is that Max creates the box from the bottom up, and Houdini's pivot point is in the middle. Let's put our boxes at 0, 0, 0. So if we go over here into Houdini, we'll say translate 0, 0, 0. And in Max, we can go down here and say 0, 0, 0. Let's give some length segments over here. How about 4 by 4 by 4? Let's hit F4 to see the edges. And in Houdini, we can say smooth wire shaded. Okay, so we've got 4 by 4 by 4 and Max. Let's do the same thing in Houdini. And the first thing we see is that there is nothing about segments, divisions. Now this brings us to the very first important thing to understand about Houdini. When you create an object in Houdini, what you get is actually a container for that object. And the actual object is inside this container. So if I double click on it, we dive into the geometry context. And inside here is the actual box. If we just click this, we kind of jump back up. This is just a container for the object. So it has no creation parameters. If we jump back in, we actually see access divisions. We can put in 5 by 5 by 5 and get the equivalent of 4 faces across like we do in Max. They think about divisions differently, but that's the way it is. Now, since we're trying to transition from being a 3ds Max user to Houdini, let's figure out conceptually how Houdini is working and compare it to something equal in Max. Well, the closest thing in Max is actually a group. So if we grouped this box, for fun, let's just call it box object 1, because that's what Houdini's calling its container. Now we've got something that looks a little bit closer to what Houdini has. We have the box object container, and inside it is box 1. We could even make it exactly like Houdini and call it box 1. And if we go over to this tree view in Houdini, we'll see we have the box object 1 container, and inside it is box 1. Okay, so back up here at the scene level, they call it the object view. They also call it the scene view. We're basically looking at a 3ds Max group. It's almost exactly the same thing. If we manipulate the group, it's going to change everything in the group. So for example, let's put 2 objects in the group so we get a better idea of what we're looking at. I'll make a sphere over in Max. I'll attach it to our group. And now we've got a box object 1 with a box in it and a sphere. All right, so if I move it, rotate it, scale it, it's going to manipulate both, right? Because we're transforming the container that's holding the objects. We're not transforming the objects themselves, right? So in Houdini, we can do the same thing. If we jump inside the geo node, we can actually also make a sphere by hitting tab, typing what we want, and hitting enter. And we've created a sphere. Let's make it out of poly mesh. If we select our eyeball, the eyeball is whatever we want to display right this moment. Houdini forces you to be very explicit about what you want to view. So only one object at a time inside the geometry node, inside this context, can be visible. Now, if I select this sphere and hit enter, I get this handle that lets me do just about everything I want. But one thing I want to do is just move it to the side. I don't see my box. That's because we can only see one thing at a time. Unless we hit tab, start typing merge, hit enter again to drop the node, select them all, grab these little dudes, drop it in, hit display, and now we can see both at the same time. In Max, we can turn our eyeballs on and off. That's a little bit more straightforward, but that's how Houdini works. So far, so good. We've learned that GeoNode in Houdini is the equivalent of a group in 3ds Max. Of course, we need to open our group in Max in order to get at the objects inside, and then close it again when we're done. Houdini doesn't make you open and close groups. You just dive in and dive out. So you can say I for in, you dive down, U for up, or jump out back to the 3D object or scene level.